Hello and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. It is Monday, October 28th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you. You know the drill. You can call in at 844-861-5537. That's 844-861-5537, or you can use the live chat, which I have a direct line to right here. Okay, so about a year ago on Timeless, I welcomed to the show a fascinating individual named Mark Seifer, and he is a handwriting analysis expert. And I gave him about 4 or 5 samples of various individuals' handwriting samples. I gave him a sample of my handwriting, of Sean, who, by the way, can we bring you on? I didn't mean to ignore the intro to you.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, we can't see you, which is shocking, but he's there. We had Sean's handwriting sample, and then we included my former college roommates, another friend of mine, and then I think we also had Hitler and Gandhi. And we asked Mark to analyze those samples, and he said that one of them was clearly psychopathic, and it was mine. No, I'm kidding. I remember what he said about ours, actually, Sean. He said that ours are very large handwriting samples, and it indicates that we're larger than life. We like people. And then I remember with one of my friends, he identified that her handwriting was very small and spaced out. And that was evidence to him that she is a bit lonely, which was... I feel bad confirming or denying if that's true, but it actually is true. It was very revelatory. So today we have a topic that's in a similar vein. I'm so interested by what things, the way that we communicate, what it says about us, our relationships with others, our relationships with ourselves, our inner emotions and feelings. And so someone after that episode recommended an excellent book to me, and I'm thrilled to welcome now the author of that book. Professor James Pennebaker is a social psychologist and language expert who is a professor emeritus of psychology at UT Austin. He's the author or editor of 12 books and over 300 articles. And today we will be discussing his book, The Secret Life of Pronouns, What Our Words Say About Us. Professor Pennebaker, welcome to Timeless.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So you contend in your book something that I found to be very surprising, and I can imagine a lot of people are surprised by it as well. You argue that if you look at content words, nouns or verbs, those words actually do not hold as much significance in revealing things about the speaker as do function words, articles or prepositions or pronouns like I or thee or and. How did you come to this conclusion, and can you expound a bit more on that thesis?
So I must admit that when I came up with this, it never occurred to me to look at these are small words, articles, a, n, and the, or prepositions or pronouns. You know, these parts of speech that when we took high school English, gosh, they were so boring. You would think that in terms of understanding somebody, you listen to their topics. What are they talking about? And of course, that's really important. That's the whole function of language. You and I are communicating ideas with these nouns and regular verbs. But then when I started to analyze the language of people, could I tell the difference between men and women? Could I tell the difference between depressed and non-depressed, or liars, or people telling the truth? It had nothing to do with content. It was with the ways they were speaking and not the content. And the ways they were speaking was revealed by these small little junk words. And these junk words are called function words. And what's fascinating about these kind of words is that they are the most common words we use, but there are only about 200 of them in English. And they, in terms of what I've said so far, what you've said so far, words, these function words account for about 50 to 60% of all the words we use. So we use them at high rates, but we don't pay attention to them. We can't hear them. And when we're reading them, we can't see them. Our brains are essentially put together to look at content and not these little words in between.
It's so true. I didn't realize how often we use them, but even if you look at the sentence, I went to the mall, I, to, and the, are the majority of the words. That's 3 out of 5. So
That's
you're
right.
right that they're very common. So can you give us some examples of how the usage of these words might reveal something about a person's mental state or relationships?
Okay, let's start off with a really obvious one. So there are hundreds of thousands of people listening to this right now, possibly. And I would
Hopefully.
like all of you to, yeah, exactly. Imagine I asked everybody to send me their last 10 emails that they sent out. I could do a fairly good job at identifying the people who were interested in people, the more sociable, the more people who spend their lives thinking about others. And all I need to look at are the number of pronouns he, she, they, or possibly we and you. Those words, they're all social. And so people who use them in their emails at high rates, tend to be very sociable people. Now, that's not wildly shocking. Now, what does it mean if the person is not using them? It doesn't mean that they hate people. It's just that they don't care about people that much. And there are a lot of people like that. And the point is something that simple is revealing a tremendous amount of information.
So you're saying if they use they more often, then they tend to be more social because they're referring to people or including a discussion of people in their content?
That's right. They're thinking about them. So we can look at emails, we can look at a diary, we can look at almost anything and get a sense of which people are interested in others and which ones aren't. But then there's so much more. So, for example, one of the hottest words is our I words. These are our first person singular pronouns, I, me, and my. So when I make references to I words, that's what I mean. As it happens, we all have kind of a theory of who uses I words. Most people think that people who use I words are self important, pompous men. Well, men might be self important and pompous, but actually, they don't use I words more. In fact, I words are almost the opposite of what most people think. When a person uses I words, they are briefly paying attention to themselves. So I could say, it's cold outside. Or I could say, I think it's cold outside. Now, those two sentences, it's cold outside versus I think it's cold outside, are psychologically very, very different.
Hmm.
A person who says, I think it's cold outside, they are essentially acknowledging another perspective. That is, they are thinking, well, some people might not think it's cold outside, but I personally think it's cold outside. You could say maybe they're a little bit insecure, or maybe they are more polite, or maybe they're just not certain if it really is that cold outside. The person who says it's cold outside has a very different worldview. I know it's cold outside. Wait, we don't need to go any further. I tend to be a little bit more arrogant and nasty if I just say it's cold outside, as opposed to the more human, I think it's cold outside. So we
Wow.
can take this in all these other directions. Yeah. I've always been fascinated by that.
So it can be the opposite where you think that using I would indicate that someone is self-centered, but then as you say there, it could actually indicate that they are recognizing that their perspective is one among many.
That's right. That's right. And these I words are very interesting because you now have to think about I words as being a marker of self-reflection, self-awareness. And so the irony is women actually use I words at much higher rates than men do. And this is not just Americans and not just English speakers, it's people in almost across cultures, across languages, that people who are more self-reflective use I words more. Also, anything that draws your attention to yourself is associated with more I words. So, for example, when a person is sick, when they're physically sick or they're feeling pain, their attention is drawn inward and they use I words more. People who are depressed use I words more than people who are not depressed. Poets, for example, who use more I words in their poetry are more likely to commit suicide than who in their poetry do not use high rates of I words. In other words, these single words are providing a tremendous amount of information.
I also learned from you that people who are of higher status, if you will, tend to use I words less. Those of comparatively lower status use I words more. And one of your examples that I thought was excellent is if you're a professor and a student writes into you, the student is going to say, "Hi, professor, I would like to improve my grade. I would like to meet with you." And then you can write back and say, "Okay, we can meet at office hours at this time." But then if you, the professor, are going to the dean of the faculty, you say, "Hi, dean of the faculty, I would like to implement this changing in my curriculum." And the dean of the faculty is saying, "Unfortunately, we're not able to accommodate that." That was a very interesting example. And, I'll tell you another thing, and I'm curious to know your response or your reaction to it. When I first went into radio broadcasting, one of the biggest pieces of advice that someone who I really respect gave me was avoid using I. You speak authoritatively. You don't want to act like you know something to be certain if you don't. Of course, if you want to state an opinion, it's acceptable to use I. But the fewer times that you use I, it actually indicates that you know more what you're talking about and you appear to have a sturdier worldview. What do you make of that?
This is where things get really shady because yes, you can start to use these use language where you avoid I words, but you come across more of as kind of a dick when you do that. In other words, if you use I words, you come across as more personal, more natural. A really nice example was in the election between John Kerry and George Bush. George Bush used I words at much higher rates than Kerry did. Kerry used we words, we, us, and our at much higher rates. Now, I happen to know that I words are associated with coming across as being personal and having some degree of humility and honesty. And we words by politician is often a marker of kind of standoffishness, just the opposite of what we all think we words reflect. So Kerry was using we words at rates much higher than Bush. And I read in the newspaper that his advisors were telling him, well, you're coming across as too stiff and formal. Start using we words even more. And I was looking at that thinking, oh man,
He's done for.
That's the wrong thing to say. But again, very smart people think we words are associated with being warm and fuzzy, and I words are associated with being arrogant. Generally, I words are associated, they come across as the person's being more authentic. And interestingly, Trump uses I words at a higher rate than almost any president and any contestant we've seen. And that's the interesting thing about it. He might not be honest all the time or even much of the time, but he comes across as authentic.
So speaking of world leaders, you have a section in your book that talks about, quote, a world leader's use of pronouns and how it could reliably presage whether he will lead his country into war. Can you say more about that?
So here's an interesting thing that happens. Let's say that you're a leader of a country, and you've made a decision, I'm going to go to war with another country. How do you talk? You have to continue acting normal, but how do you do it? Well, what you have to do is you have to start kind of being a little bit deceptive. And actually, when a person becomes a leader, they have to be somewhat deceptive in the sense that, I remember when I was a regular faculty member, I could say anything I wanted to anybody, but then when I became a department chair, all of a sudden I have to be a little bit more guarded in what I say. I'm not lying to people, but I'm sometimes not telling them everything that I really feel like I should be telling them. And that would be true of a leader. And one of the things we started to do was a number of studies on deception. And when people are being deceptive, they use I words less. In other words, they are trying to hide part of themselves. And so I studied this with Hitler before he first marched into Poland. I looked at George Bush's language before he went into Iraq. And I recently looked at Putin before he went into Ukraine. And in all of these cases, their press conferences or even in their speeches, they use I words less as they got closer and closer to going to dispatching their troops.
Wow. Because it was distancing themselves from the action.
That's right. That's right. And to be honest, if you're a leader, if you're a good leader, you don't want to show your hand about what your actual intentions might be.
So we've talked about I words. What about ands or an or other kinds of what you would deem to be function words? What do those reveal about an individual?
So
the last thing I heard was I, which means he is a humble individual. That one got Sean cracking up. Did we lose Professor?
All right, I have to take him out.
Yes,
for a moment.
We lost him. Oh my gosh, I'm so surprised.
I'm sorry to say we have lost.
All right, well, that's okay because
This is fascinating.
It
though.
is very I know.
I thought the complete opposite.
most of us do.
I feel like someone who says I are selfish and arrogant.
There we go.
It's a nice thing to learn.
Yeah, but
hello? Can you
perhaps,
hear me?
Oh, we
there
have
he
him
is.
back.
Here we go.
Well, hello.
Okay. I heard you just fine the entire time.
Oh, well, I wish that I could have heard you.
Okay, your question, but the good news is your question I didn't catch. You had said words like and.
Yes. Let's talk about other function words besides I words. What do they reveal
Okay.
about an individual?
Okay, so keep in mind there are all sorts of function words. So for example, we can look at conjunctions. These could be words like and, with, because. These are words where you're trying to add things on. So we can look at and versus but. Here comes a big shock. There's a big difference. A person who uses but is somebody who is essentially saying, this is true, but not always. Or, that's a great idea. But this is a marker of a person who is in this psychological state of essentially negating what the other person, or even what I've been saying as well. Whereas a person who says "and" often is somebody who tends to overgeneralize. And this, some other, there's, it's so funny you ask these questions because, my mind's just exploding with all these, how much information you can get just by looking at words. Here's another group of words that I've become particularly interested in. These are words not officially function words, but they're still words that nobody cares about. We call them cognitive words, cognitive process words. These are words like think, believe, understand, wonder. So if a person says, I think I'm going to be doing this, or I wonder if I should be doing this, or words such as that. When people use those kind of words, it's a marker that they don't understand what they're talking about very much. They're trying to actually work through things. They're trying to understand, but they don't understand it. So there was a wonderful study done several years ago by a group looking at country and western songs. And they looked at two different types. Country and western songs that told a story, which is a very common country and western approach, versus songs where they are just describing a scene that happened, but they don't have a story with it. And the question was, do these people, which of these two types of songs are there more of these cognitive words? And what you find is if a person has a story, they know it. They know the beginning, middle, and end. They are not working through anything. It's the people who don't have a story. they are the ones that are still trying to figure things out, and they are doing this cognitive work. And people who are using these cognitive words at higher rates are trying to work things through, and it's almost as though their mind is full of this issue. They have more difficulty sleeping. If they're an athlete, they're more likely to have an injury. In other words, use of these at high rates are markers of people ruminating, just constantly trying to work through what issues are going on in their lives.
In our final few minutes, I want to go back to this issue of deception, which I find to be very useful, because a lot of us, whether we're in a work situation, a love life situation, a familial situation, we're always trying to gauge if someone is being genuine with us. Besides looking for the amount that they use or don't use the word I, which we've established actually correlates with being more truthful if you use I because you're taking responsibility for your words. What are some other indicators that might reveal that someone is being truthful or not truthful?
So another group of words that are interesting are a group of conjunctions and prepositions that are words that suggest some kind of differentiation. Words like except, but, without, words such as that. If a person, if I say, so what did you do last night? And you're telling me the truth. You'll say, well, last night I went to the grocery store and I was going to buy some of this, but then I thought, no, I don't want this. Instead, I'll get this. And then I started to go home, and then I realized I forgot to do this. And then, so I'm saying what I did, but also what I did not do. A person who is lying can't do that because they didn't do any of it. And so what they'll say is, well, see, last night I went to the store and then I bought some food and then I came home and then I fed the cat and then I went to sleep. In other words, they can't say what they didn't do because that's too complex because last night they were out partying and so forth. They didn't do any of that. So telling the truth means you're also saying what you did and what you didn't do.
That is so interesting. I'm going to walk about my life differently. I can imagine when you're having conversations with people, you are scanning for this all of the time. I look at handwriting so differently. Oh, no, really? Why not?
No, you can't, because you can't hear it. You can't see it. So, for example, telling the truth, a person who's telling the truth in natural conversation, maybe 4% of their words will be I words. People who are lying, maybe 2% of their words are I words. And, that's a huge difference, 4 versus 2%. But my God, that means there's 2 words per 100 versus 4 words per 100. You can't hear it. It's just beyond comprehension.
You need to know someone's baseline in order to really establish. I see.
Yeah, and you need a computer.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I find this to be so interesting, and we'd love to welcome you back on anytime.
Great. This has been fun. Thank you.
And before we go, I am being very truthful with you when I tell you that I want to tell you about something I'm sure you've been dying to hear about, and that is MyPillow. Right now, you can get for the first time ever a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices. That's only $14.88, but it gets better. For a limited time, they're offering their entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get a queen size MyPillow for just $18.88. Upgrade to a king for only $1 more. Get the body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. Go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6745 to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. And on top of that, you can get free shipping on orders over $75. They've never been offered this low before. There are limited quantities at this price. The limit is actually 10. And once they're gone, they're gone. Go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman to get the standard MyPillow for only $14.88. That is the lowest price ever. Don't delay. Order today. Again, use the promo code Hartman at checkout. Before we go, I want to tell you 2 things that I was thinking about during this episode. And Sean, as always, I'd be curious to know your impressions. The first is, and I know this doesn't exactly fall into the line of function words versus content words. But one thing that I am always hyper aware of is when people are using the passive voice. And you know who does this a lot is Kamala Harris. She goes, conversations were had, decisions were made, conclusions were reached, and, you know, hyper nodding. And that is similar to what Professor Pennybaker was saying about distancing yourself. When you're telling the truth, you use I, or you use an active voice. When you're being passive, think about that. When you say decisions were made, who's making the decisions? Conclusions were reached. What are they? Who came to them? What was the process by which they reached these decisions? So that's one thing that I have my antenna up for. And another thing, and you will appreciate this, Sean, is the fellow Catholic. He was saying that another way that you can tell if someone is being deceptive is if they don't include what they didn't do. In other words, if someone is being truthful and you're asking them, what did you do last night? Or in the past, they'll go through their thought process with you of what they did do and also what they wanted to do but didn't do. That reminds me of Catholic Mass when the priest says, oh God, you can see that someone may not have been so good at going in recent weeks. But the priest says that we call to mind not only what we did do, but what we failed to do. And that is, in their mind, a encompassing definition of the truth. And so I just thought that was corroborated by what Professor Pennybaker said, that it's both what you did do and what you didn't do that you often consider when you're truly being truthful. Reactions, comments, concerns?
No, I was thinking the same thing about Kamala when he was talking about it. It's funny you bring that up.
Oh, really?
I was thinking the same thing.
Were you thinking the same thing about?
I was thinking of her.
Yeah, well.
I was not thinking of Catholic Mass, no.
I was going to ask.
I was thinking of Kamala when he was talking.
Well, good. We hit one of the two. Well, as always, I'm curious to know what you think. You can email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I love hearing from you. And I will see you tomorrow right here on Timeless at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, but not until...
The direct quote from Mass is, in what I have done and what I have failed to
Is that not what I said?
It was close.
It was a little clunky at the beginning, but then we got to it. Well, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you soon.